I've heard from friends of mine around the world that a couple of people are still confused about what the ICAC program is about. So I'm going to attempt a quick explanation of ICAC. ICAC, I-C-A-C, stands for, in the United States, Internet Crimes Against Children, I-C-A-C Task Force. Okay, that is different from a European Waste, Fraud, and Abuse Commission of the same name. There's a European Commission called I.C.A.C, but they deal with waste, fraud, and abuse, and this deals with, obviously, what police do to try to keep children safe, or at least that's what they say. We'll get into that in a minute. Codified in 1998 under 34 U.S.C. U.S.C. stands for United States Code 21101 through 21131. Okay, that's 21101 through 21131. And you can look that up, 34 USC 21101 through 21131, and learn all about how ICAC is established. So this was developed and generally has grown exponentially over the years. So the primary place that ICAC began was out of the impetus of a sheriff in Bedford County, Virginia, which is in central Virginia, and has grown in the last 30 years to be a behemoth. It is now made up of at least 61 coordinated forces comprised of parts of 5,400 different police divisions across the country. Its primary purpose, according to itself, is first and foremost to rescue, that is, rescue children who are at risk right now. As we'll see, and if you look at my videos, that's not exactly what ICAC does. How do we know this? Because when we put the pressure on them to show their statistics of real children who are actually being saved, we find very, very few. What they tend to do is conflate statistics, that is, confuse them with human trafficking, with white-collar crimes, with adult prostitution, and with many other things. And we know this too because police love to get in front of a podium and crow about what they have done. They do it all the time when they get one of these things under their belt, and they go and they talk about all these predators and all these people that they caught, but they never really tell you the whole story. For example, they don't tell you how they go about gathering these people. They don't tell you that what they really do is quite different from what they claim. So let's get into that just a little bit. The number one goal, as I said, is to do a reactive sting. And that works like this. A reactive sting is where what we heard through all the crime dramas of the 1960s and 70s. That is, you get a tip, there's a child in danger, you talk to the parents, maybe get the child's assistance. The child is on the phone with the person who would seek to have sex with him or her, and you're listening in another room, right? And then you go and you make the arrest. You find out the details, you get an arrangement where you get together with the child and the person, but the child isn't there. It's the police to arrest the person, and you have all that information, right? Everybody would say, yeah, that's pretty much it, right? But that's not what happens. Their number two goal is the one that they tend to fulfill and is the true number one goal. And number two goal is to advance an environment where they're protecting children. And so they do what's called proactive stings. And those are the problem. That's where we have the issue. What do proactive stings do? Well, as the name suggests, when you're proactive, what you're doing is you're sitting out there and you are waiting for something to happen. Now, I want you to think about this. Everybody hates the cop who sits at the bottom of the hill, right? And you know that you can't go over 35 miles an hour on this stupid hill, and the cop is waiting right down there to give you a ticket. And everybody hates that. If you polled 9 out of 10 Americans, I would say 9 out of 10 would say, yeah, I don't like this, even though they're guilty, right? You're guilty. You're going down. You're not riding the brakes. You're not supposed to ride the brakes, by the way, according to most DMVs of which I'm aware, but people do because you don't want to get a ticket at the end. Everybody hates that cop and they hate that practice, but they accept it. And of course, you accept it because you are, in effect, going over the speed limit. Well, imagine if you were setting up a sting on a adult vulnerable platform where people talk, smack. They talk about what they want to do sexually. They are very vulnerable. They talk about a life partner. They talk about their fetishes. They talk about a variety of things, but it's an adult platform, and they go onto that platform to find an adult. This is where police lie to you and they say, no, we're going on and we're dealing with children. Uh, but that doesn't really make sense, right? You want to go where you're going to get most of the children. And there's less than 10%, according to studies, which do surveys. So it's not exactly, hard science. They don't have a lot of hard data on it. But the best guess, less than 10% of the people who go on these sites are children. And children who meet up with adults are even less than that. Okay, even fewer children, that is, will meet with people. Well, so why would you spend your time and effort there if you have, rec centers and schools and um, Little League and Boy Scouts, many area, Girl Scouts, many areas where you have adults and children very clearly interacting in large numbers. Well, I suspect the reason is, and we suspect the reason is, because that's where they can get a great rate of return. You have to understand police are under a tremendous amount of strain. They are under a federal mandate to protect children and to be looking for child exploitation worldwide. The 61 coordinated forces of I.C.A.C also have an international presence. They work with Interpol and they work with other international agencies, police agencies there to curb child exploitation. The problem is what they do in the United States is create child exploitation. And this is how they do it. Go back to the analogy I made about the cop sitting at the bottom of the hill. Nobody likes that cop. Well, imagine if you're a cop on the a dating site or a hookup site or a gamer's site, okay, where you have kids who are playing games with people all over the world, and you have 10 and 12-year olds on these sites too, playing games too, not on adult sites so much, but you may occasionally run into one. I never have. I've talked to people around the world who have responded to my site. They've told me many stories, and not one of hundreds I've talked to that said that they were on there, and I asked, said that they were on there as a preteen, okay, and very few as a teen. So imagine if you go on these websites and you're a police officer, the first thing you do is you violate the terms of service because you're not an adult and you're not a real subscriber. So you're violating the terms of service that says that adults, only real adults, have to be on there. And then you make a fake profile as an adult, not as a kid. And then you don't do like the cop at the bottom of the hill where you just sit there, okay? Where you just sit there because then, people are going to hit you up thinking you're an adult. And that's exactly what happens. And then you talk to them as an adult for a while. Well, the question is, stop right there. Why is the police doing that? They're not actually looking for a crime in progress, like a reactive sting. So stop right there. What are they doing pretending to be an adult on an adult site? And here's the really whacked part. After 100 messages, sometimes they turn it and say, oh, by the way, I'm 15. So stop right there. Why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? You might say, if you're the average troll out there, you love this stuff because, especially if you're a so-called predator hunter where you're trying to get significance by capturing people, you love this because laying the trap is really important for you to be able to get someone. But the question is, would they have gone after somebody who is underage if you hadn't helped them? Would they have done that? You don't know that. Okay? You don't know that. Why are you playing to people's base instincts and fears and concerns and interests when they haven't expressed those first? So the police are not doing like the guy at the bottom of the hill. They're not sitting there waiting for something to happen as they claim. And why do you suppose they claim that? Because that would be proper procedure. But they're not actually doing that. Remember, they've already violated the terms of service. They've made a fake profile. They're on there acting as an adult. Why? Why? There's no crime in progress. And then they pretend to be somebody all of a sudden who's underage. And that's where the trap begins to close. Okay? That would be like the cop at the bottom of the hill spreading tacks all over the place, right? Or setting up fake roadblocks and obstacles on the road so you'll crash. And then he runs over and says, well, you should have been more careful, and gives you a ticket for that. People would be outraged. And that's exactly what they're doing online. They're setting up obstacles and interfering with the usual traffic for no reason at all. All right. So once they say that they're underage, you are not allowed in their understanding and in common troll understanding to say, wait, who are you? Wait, you've been telling me all along you're an adult female in her 30s. The images you're showing me look like a attractive female, or maybe on a gay site, you look like an attractive 25-year-old male or whatever. Confusion sets in, and then they exploit that confusion. So again, why are police doing this? Is there a crime in progress? No. And that's where it really goes off the rails. That's where you want to look at my other videos, because then what cops do is engage in what is commonly known as entrapment. They go on from there, and the argument is, well, you should have known. You should have, as soon as it got weird, you should have bailed out of the conversation. You shouldn't have been talking to a minor, I hear all the time, even though you didn't know there was a minor at the time when the sex talk was done, which is a part that police never bring up. The prosecution never says that at trial. And if you think it's as easy as getting a good defense attorney, that's hard. First of all, you're talking about upwards of $200,000 for your case, and very few people have that kind of money. Secondly, they'll push you for a plea deal because when you're facing 100 years in prison, 10 seems like a pretty good deal. And again, you weren't on there for that purpose. You didn't have that predisposition. That's the nexus, that confused space that I talk about in my channel here, I.C.A.C. Unpacked. So I want to give you an idea too of what I.C.A.C. does in their future, near future. They have conferences where they talk about how to entrap people. They have one October 6th through 10 out in Redmond, Washington, and they're partnering with Microsoft. And so what they're always trying to do is find greater technology. And their argument is the pervs, these sophisticated people, the people like you and me have all this great technology and that we have to keep abreast of them. We have to keep ahead of them. But in reality, what they're doing is they're pretending like everybody who is on this site is like the man who uh, hurt poor Adam Walsh or Jacob Wetterling or Alicia of Alicia's Project, where she was put in a cage in Herndon, Virginia, when she snuck out at age 14, I think it was, to meet a man she thought she was in love with. Okay, those sorts of things are the extremes. They're not the rule because they're catching thousands and thousands of people who had no predilection to hurting a minor whatsoever. There's no evidence that they did. But if you, again, push people and put them through a virtue test where they might cross that line, the question is why you're doing that. Well, Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in 2023 got $41 million in grant money. If you've ever written a federal grant or any grant, you know there are certain components to that. What's one of the components? You have to produce a problem, and then you have to have a solution, a result. And if you don't have a problem and have a solution, which in many cases for I.C.A.C. is we need more money, we need more technology, we need more stuff to keep track of, your average Joe who's just going on to get his jollies or just having a hookup. If you understand that, then you understand that the more money they come in and the more people they arrest, the more they say, oh, look at this terrible problem here. And even though they will argue that, when studies are done, meta studies, when they look at these people, they follow them, they look at their backgrounds, they don't see any predilection for harming children. Quite the opposite. They do see that there's a predilection, a predisposition that police have to fulfill that grant mandate. Otherwise, they start looking bad before the politicians. They start looking like they're not doing their job, which is what happened in 2022 when Congressman Wasserman Schultz of Florida and others wrote to the Justice Department demanding to know why they weren't working harder trying to find kids who are being exploited. So that's a little bit of a primer of what ICAC, Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force is. I hope you enjoyed that, and please look at my other videos here where I go into greater detail in specific cases. Have a good day.